Hello, this is teddygaming and welcome back to another read through on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles TMNT Mirage Volume 4 issue number 22. So, in the last read through we saw Mikey on a prison on the dinosaur people's planet, Donatello not being able to grow, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, let's get into this one, let's go. If you do like this content and want to see more from this channel, please do make sure to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications, comment, and all that good stuff. Now let's get on with the video. So, this is how it began. We were sitting in the front seat of my car, in the lower parking lot of Mount Skinner. Renee had just agreed to help me, to use her time powers to show me the answers to questions about where I came from, who our real parents were, and then I had this weird sense of dislocation, or sliding sideways out of my existence for a moment, and the next thing I knew, I was looking out at a completely different scene. I had a moment of absolute terror, because I had no idea where I was, and everything looked totally strange. And then I realised that part of the strangeness was what I was seeing through my eyes, that were no longer human, and I realised that the sound of breath I heard here, my breath, was not coming from my mouth, but along my sides, and I felt that my body had become stiff, my joints were different, my head swiveled in a manner which was wrong, and I looked down and saw that I had 6 limbs, not six insects' limbs, and then it hit me. Like the man in the cover story, I become a cockroach. I'm not sure why I didn't go completely insane right at that moment, but probably it was because given that it was Renette who was helping me, I was expecting something really weird. And, even now, even after I've had time to think it over, to analyse and dissect the experience, I'm not sure if it was actually a cockroach or it just thought I was. And Renette wouldn't tell me, and I'm not even sure I really want to know her powers. It was being mysterious to me. I never really understood her, what she is, what she does, but whatever had happened, I soon overcome the disorientation of my position and realised where I was. And then when I was an insect clinging to the ceiling of my family's apartment more than 30 years ago, and there was my dad sketching, drawing my mum, and they were arguing. No, not arguing exactly, but having a heated discussion about adoption. Mum was going on about how they should at least think more about it. My dad was shaking his head in that way he had, but one which said, I really don't want to talk about this right now. And then Mum said something that threw me. She said that if she could have more babies she would. As I listened more to the discussion, I came to realise that something had happened when my sister Robin was born. Something during childbirth that damaged my mother and rendered her unable to bear any more children. This was news to me. Mum had never mentioned this to me while she was alive. I suppose it was just one of the secrets that would be revealed during the exorcism into the past. Finally, they fell silent, and the discussion was over. I could sense that this was not the first time they had this talk, and likely it wouldn't be the last. Dad said he had to finish going through the rest of the boxes of stuff from an estate sale they just been to, and headed downstairs towards the antique shop. Mum sat there, silent and sad. I watched for her, and for a few minutes, but realised there was no way I could comfort her. I decided to follow Dad. It was really weird walking on the ceiling on the walls, but I soon got used to it. Renette followed me downstairs, and in the closet shop we stopped to watch my dad as he went through some battered cardboard boxes, filled with stuff, things he had purchased with the hope of reselling them in the second time round shop. But he was also doing one of his favourite things, looking for that odd item which would catch his fancy, something that would claim as his own. I remember thinking of often during those years that this was the real reason he dealt in antiques, that moment of finding something strange and unusual and unique, something he'd not only never seen before, but never thought existed. But I was starting to wonder, why were we there at that moment? Renette promised to take me back to which we would reveal the secrets of my birth, but this scene seemed to have no connection with that secret whatsoever. I turned to Renette, prepared to vent my frustration, and then realised I didn't know how. In this cockroach form, I had no power of speech. In frustration, I waved my forelegs in what must have looked like a ridiculous display, but Renette seemed to understand somehow, and in an oddly human gesture, she put one foreleg before her face as if she was shushing me, and pointed towards my father with the other. I began to watch him again as she took various items out of the box, examined them closely, and set them down on the counter in different piles, separating out the possibility valuable items. Then he paused and pulled out a small wooden box about the size of a brick. It would carry a strange design on its lid and sides. Dad held it in his hands, turning it this way and that, stroking the smooth edge of the carvings, peering closely at it. He found what appeared to be a latch release button and pressed it. With a soft click, the lid box opened slightly. Within the box nest, its folds of red velvet, lay a curious object. It was roughly slender, about 4 inches long, and 3/4 of an inch in diameter, except for its ends, which taped to about 1/4 of an inch. One end held that was unmistakably somewhat used pencil eraser, while the other end was an open shaft about 1 inch long, which could have easily accepted the end of a standard-sized pencil, while it was the middle section that comprised about 2/3 of the object's total length which drew my attention. It was a cage. There's no other words I could think of which would be more appropriate, constructed of a graceful, slender arch of what appears to be silver interconnecting in a beautiful organic filigree. There was a section of the cage which appeared to be hinging door, cleverly bended into the design that held closed with an elegant latch, but it was that lay within that lovely cage which was truly extraordinary. It was a gem, but of a type which I had never seen before. It was fractured and seemed to glow slightly with an internal light. I say I'd never seen it before, but I had heard it described, and for a moment I stopped breathing. I was stunned. For what I was looking at could be nothing else but the mysterious crystal that Dondo had described to me, the crystal that my former attendant Kirby had used to create, with strokes of his pencil, all of those mysterious beings and portals into another dimension. A place in which Don had almost been forever trapped. But the way Don had described it to me, the crystal that Kirby used had been cruelly attached to the pencil with rubber band. Where had it come from? My father had obviously purchased it sight unseen, as part of this lot of stuff from the estate sale. But whose estate was it? And how had they come into possession of such a powerful thing? I watched as my father took the thing out of its box and hefted it, rolling it in his finger, holding it up and admiring the way it caught the light. When he set it back down in the box and continued looking at the rest of the items. Just as he was finishing, I heard light footsteps and my sister Robin came downstairs. She was all of 3 years old and at that moment dressed in pyjamas and secretly carrying a stuffed animal. I had a sudden flash of nostalgia. She and I had done this many times, come down to the antique store to say goodnight to Dad before heading off to bed. My father saw Robin come in and picked her up, smiling. With his other hand, he picked up a box with crystal artifacts and began to walk back up the stairs. I followed her skittering across the ceiling so I could hear what they were saying. Robin was begging Dad for a puppy, something I remember her doing many times when we were kids. He responded with a familiar, "City apartments aren't good places for dogs, honey," line I had heard too often. Then they reached the top of the stairs, and before I could follow, the door had closed. I decided to look for a crack through which I could fit my insect body, but Renette stopped me with an unmistakable gesture with a forelimb towards her mouth parts. She indicated a desire to eat. I realised with a start that I was hungry, but how and what did cockroaches eat? I felt slightly nauseated at that thought. But some insects took over, and I followed Renette into the darkness. What ensued was to be template for the days to come. After observing my family for a while, I would feel the need to be a cockroach, and Renette and I would go off and do cockroach things. I dimly recall much a stuttering through dark, tight spaces, running from predators, feeding on small pieces of dead things, even mating with other cockroaches. And it's probably for the best that I don't remember these things too well. That way lies madness. The important thing that I do recall clearly were those moments when I watched that my father did, and one of the most important came of the day that he realised, or at least began to grasp, the power of the strange crystal artifact, and it came in the most mundane way. My father was sketching as he often did, in his little studio, actually just a small storage room in my family's apartment. He was working in one of the many sketchbooks he had. Remember the one he looked in the attic? and he was have a moment standing up to draw an apple that he had asked placed on the desk. He picked up the pencil and must have realised that he had worn down the eraser to almost nothing. Then he got this aha look on his face and opened up a small wooden box that held the crystal and cage artifact, took it out and fitted it to the end of the pencil. It fitted so perfectly that it was clearly to me, and to him too, I'm sure, that it was made to be attached to a pencil. With his new eraser in place, my father began to draw. He was good at it, and soon had a lovely rendering of an apple, using the eraser to add a small highlight to it. Finished with that drawing, he turned to the next blank page, took a sip of his coffee, went to turn the apple for a different perspective, and froze. Sitting a new inches away from his original apple was another one, almost identical, but with a few small differences. My father had thrown the puzzle. Where had this apple come from? He picked it up, hefted it in his hand, when a shrug as if to say to himself that it must have been there all along. He placed it next to the first apple, arranging the two in a pleasing composition, and started working on the drawing of them. Again, he received an excellent rendering and again, it was so when he looked up from his finished drawing to see two more apples on the desk, looking more like the original two. He stared at the new apples for a minute or two, then turned his gaze to the artifact he had attached to a pencil, then back to the apples. He held the pencil up before him and stared at the crystal, wishing to pause slightly with the inner light. He set the pencil down and rubbed his eyes. I could just imagine the thoughts that were going through his head as he tried to figure out what had just happened. The evidence of the sense was undeniable, yet still utterly fascinating. Picking up the pencil again, my father began to draw more of a rendering of a group of two apples, and a very realistic yellow jacket perched on the upper curve of one of the apples. This time he spent as much time as watching the apples as he did looking at the page. Within seconds of finishing the drawing, an almost identical yellow jacket appeared on the apple on the desk. My father gasped, and he gasped again as the insect moved its wings and began to fly around the room in that lazy yet menacing way yellow jackets have. It buzzed too near my father's head, and at the next opportunity, when the instinct had light briefly on the desktop, he slammed his sketchbook down, crushing it. He turned the sketchbook over, staring at a triangle with his insect guts, and smirked his spiky limbs. Then a small popping noise and made him look up, and he stared at so as he watched the first apple that had mysteriously appeared and fade away. Moments later, the other two followed suit. My father looked back at the sketchbook as he had a crushed yellow jacket. Sure enough, about a minute later, to fade from view, taking with it all evidence of his demise, leaving only a small dimple on the page. Was this the first time magic had entered my father's life? I had no way to tell, but the fact that he had so quickly accepted this incredible phenomenon made me wonder. I still wonder. In any event, he practiced with a pencil for the next several hours, testing it on a variety of objects, both living and inanimate, with similar results. He finished a drawing, then a thing would appear, and shortly thereafter, the thing would fade away. I noticed, as I'm sure he did, that some of the things lasted longer than others. This was an element of a phenomena which would become key to what was to happen later, and something my father would study quite closely. But for now, it was just having fun. He wore down the pencil to a nub and quickly replaced it with another. Eventually, his hand grew sore from all the sketching, and somewhat reluctantly, he set his artifact back to the box. He stopped and appeared to reconsider, then took the box and hid it deep within a closet in his studio. Then he left. I wonder when and how he would reveal this miraculous occurrence to my mother. It would be another week and a half, during which time he practiced and experimented as much as he could before he broached it. Picking the moment when Rowan had fallen asleep, he led Mum into the studio, cautiously preparing her with cryptic components about what she was about to see. Mother seemed bemused by it all, but her jaw dropped for the first time my father demonstrated the power of the artifacts. It was clear that she found it hard to believe what she was seeing, but the fact of the matter was that she was seeing it. There was no way for her to deny what was happening, especially after my dad offered the pencil to her to try it out for herself. My mother was not the artist that my father was, and her drawing of a flower produced what looked like a bizarre abstract sculpture, and she appeared to relieve it when it disappeared. They spent a lot of time that night discussing what should be done with the artifact, and one thing they agreed upon was the necessity to keep it their secret. It was clear to them that if they revealed this bit of magic to the world, it would likely be taken away from them. But what could they do with it beyond entertaining themselves? These things were created with the power of the artifact disappeared to be revealed three-dimensional versions of the drawing that was created of them, and if drawings carefully, they appeared to have the physical properties of those things as well, at least until they disappeared. At first I was amazed at the apparent ease which was both my parents had adopted to the knowledge of this magical artifact, this thing which should not have existed according to all they knew about mundane reality, but it then dawned on me that I was the same way after all. When I met the Tells, it didn't take too long for me to accept their existence. My father continued to experiment with the artifact and slowly came to understand many of its properties, its abilities and limitations. The most important revelation came one night after he had just endured at least an hour of impassioned pleading from Robin, who still had not given up on her quest for a puppy. I could tell that Dad was pretty close to breaking down and letting her have what she wanted, but his practical side won out in the end. But after Robin had sulkily gone off to bed, my father went back to the sketchbook and drew up a puppy. As he was using a model reference, the puppy didn't look like one bred in particular, but in comparison the key appealing puppy visual elements, big eyes, fluffy body, and so on. And moments later, there it was, tail wagging and tongue hanging out. My father picked it up with all expression. The puppy licked his face and tried to chew on his shirt button. Dad played with it for a while, and got up to get a small bowl of water and a cracker. He kept looking at his watch and realised that he was timing it, waiting to see how long it would take to disappear, like everything else created with the artifact had. But this one lasted through the night, and beyond. It proposed a conundrum for my father. He was loath to destroy or give away the magical crystal creature, and yet how could he keep it in the apartment when he had told Robin she could have a puppy? In the end, his heart won out, and with my mother's blessing, he gave the puppy to a dolorous happy Robin. The animal lasted another 2 weeks, until one day when it faded from view, leaving only some half-chewed dog toys and a wailing Robin. She didn't see it disappear, fortunately, and my parents told her that the puppy had run away, as puppies sometimes do. After a few days had some trips to the toy store for a new stuffed animal and dolls, Robin was mollified with a new sniffle stop. I can't say for certain, but sometime during the day, when the puppy was still around, I think my father got his big idea, that one which could change my family's life. It was one evening after Robin had gone to bed that he approached onto my mother. He told her that in his experiments with the artifact, and specifically in the case of a puppy, he had realised that how long the things created with the artifact lasted seemed to be in direct opposition to how much emotional energy he invested in them with his drawings. He realised that the puppy had lasted so much longer than the other things because he had been so affected by Robin's pleas at that moment. My father was a perceptive person, and she quickly intuited where my father was going. Still, it was audacious enough an idea that she didn't immediately say anything. They sat in silence for a few minutes, and then tentatively at first, but then with growing excitement began to discuss it. Over the next few days, they began to assemble the reference material they needed, beginning with my family's photo album. They carefully pulled out all the photos of Robin as baby, and even the few photos they had of themselves as infants. My mother brought the cartoon issue of every baby-related magazine on the newsstand, and went into clipping and tearing frenzy, taking out all the images of babies which she found appealing and appropriate, and my father began sketching, but first removed the artifact from the end of his pencil, using the photos and magazine clippings as he guided my father's side to draw babies, lots of babies. My mother hovered over his shoulder, often hints, criticising, supporting. I think he must have filled up a whole sketchbook just filled with rendering of various babies' faces. Then the time came when they made their own first attempt. My parents set up a low coffee table in the studio with a soft blanket draped over it. After warming up with some quick sketching that fit the artifact to the end of his pencil, and with photo reference surrounding him, he began to draw a baby. The baby they wanted, the baby they saw in their dreams. I had not seen him work so intensely on a single drawing before. It was clear that this one was different. Mum sat quietly nearby, her eyes closed, her brow frowned as if in deep concentration. They had worked on for about an hour on that drawing, one of the best I'd ever see him do. The image of the baby that emerged onto a page of a sketchbook was beautiful, almost an idealized version of Itmnt. Finally, after making a few quick erasures and a couple of touch-up lines, Dad put down his pencil and looked up. My mum was staring, transfixed, her hands to her mouth, tears starting in her eyes. There, on a blanket in front of him, was a baby. A beautiful baby. Their baby. For weeks my parents were ecstatic. The unbelievable power of the artifact, coupled with Dad's drawing skills, had made their impossible dream come true. I had wondered how, for Robin, they would reconcile the sudden appearance of this baby with the fact that my mother had displayed no outward signs of pregnancy. But it turns out to be no very big problem. Robin was at the age when she would buy pretty much anything she was told, and she was happy to have a new baby sister. All seems to be going well, until one night when my mum was bottle feeding the baby, it just vanished, just like all of the other things the artifact had created. To say my mother was befested would be a gross understatement. She stared in shock for a moment, then she rushed to my father, followed by Renette. I scurried along the ceiling, trying to keep up. Mum found my father in the antique shop, and through racking sob, told him what just happened. Dad seemed to be only slightly less devastated than Mum. His stunned, defeated expression spoke volumes, but somehow he had my mother found the strength to gather themselves and figure out what to do. They quickly realised that they must figure out some excuse to explain to Robin why their new baby sister was gone, and the one they came up with was simple. The baby had come down with some kind of flu or distemper and needed to be in the hospital for a while. If it was of course only a stopgag, they would at some point have to find some kind of explanation for what happened to a baby. The obvious one, which I clearly dreaded, was to tell Robin that her new sibling had died from ailment which sent her to hospital. It seemed the inevitable resolution to this scenario, unless both of my parents seemed to come to the same conclusion, almost simultaneously, albeit with some reluctancy, as if by doing so they were toying with the wrath of the gods, or whatever mysterious power they had behind the artifact. They agreed that their next step should be try again. They concluded that perhaps for the first time they had some small, niggling doubts that this strange experiment would succeed. They had made their attempt somehow imperfect, flawed. This time they would be sure of themselves, and both attempt to use whatever reserves of emotional energy they had to try to create a being which would last, which would not fade away. So they tried again. Once more succeeded. They had a baby girl again, and due to my father's skill with a pencil, the infant looked nearly identical to the first one. As expected, Robin was delighted to have her sibling back, and with the flexibility of a very young, accepted her as the same baby sister she had known before. For a time all was well, though my parents seemed more anxious for and protective of this baby than the last. The child seemed completely normal and solid, as stable in the reality of one could hope for. They even named her April. This, then, was me, and I marvelled to look upon myself as a small wriggling infant. It seemed that the answer to my question about my origins had been given to me, and Renette and I no longer needed to be there in the past. I thought it was strange that Renette would not immediately use her powers to transport us back to the present, my presence. That should have been my clue that this was not over. Was Kirby's last message to Donatello. Life at best is bittersweet. I was again about to learn the truth of that, as 42 days after that second miracle birth, baby April vanished. This time it happened out of anyone's sight. I was doing mindless cockroach things with Renette when I heard the wailing moans of anguish. I scurried to the nursery, and all I needed to know was revealed to me in the sight of my mother sobbing before an empty crib. I could see a set of baby pajamas lying in the crib, positioned as if the baby within them had simply melted away, which was incessant what had happened. It was fortunate that Robin was at the moment doing a sleepover weekend with my grandparents in conservatory. My parents would have been hard pressed to explain even to a gullible young child how this disappearance had happened, but even more problematic would it have been my mother's near breakdown. My father was nearly as much of a wreck, and for the first time in my memory I watched him drink himself into a superior with a large bottle of wine he kept in the studio room. He did this only after hours of comforting my mother, or perhaps I should say trying to comfort her. Nothing he did had much effect, and his desperate suggestion that they try again was met with the most vehement of rejection from my mother. I think she had come to a point of seeing this as a pointless exercise in futility, almost a devilish test to torment them. She was adamant that they should abandon these attempts to cheat fate and biology. Clearly they were not meant to have another child, and they must accept the bitterly pill. And I think she somehow intruded what I knew, that these babies created with the power of the crystal artifact didn't simply disappear, but went somewhere unknown. I knew from what Donatello had told me of his adventure with Kirby that they were another realm, another dimension, perhaps where all, or at least a vast majority of the things created in this way with crystal eventually ended up, and it gave me pause to think of these vulnerable infants being transported to that realm. Had they survived? Did I have sisters existing in this strange place? It's tough. It's a thought which has stayed with me since the strange trip through time with Renette. Even now I wonder, but back then I was suddenly distracted from these missings by what my father did next. I still don't understand what happened completely, or where he got the idea, even if we did have any bearing on what transported thereafter. But in the depths of the darkness and despair, a wild light came into my father's eyes. He stretched to his feet with shaking hands, took his sketchbook again, and started at it, opening to a blank page. He took out the pencil with the artifact and then stopped. He held the pencil up and wrenched it out of the artifact and threw it with great force into the corner of the room. Then he moved unsteadily to the desk, opened a drawer and rummaged about, eventually coming with a bottle of ink and a small tipped brush. He stumbled back to his chair and sat heavily in it, wrapping some tape around the end of a brush. He managed to fit it in snug in my artifact, and then I'd never seen and not seen since the sheer transformation through will that I saw. Then in my father, his hand steadied, his eyes cleared, and every line in his face reflected almost in divine inspiration and adamant determination. It was as if his entire life had led to this one moment and had to rise to the occasion or be damned. With a skill I never knew he possessed, my father began to draw again, but this time directly in ink. Using the brush which had dipped into the ink bottle, he made not a single unsure line, and he was astonished by the facility with which he worked. As the image of the infant emerged, it was as if the dense black ink was his soul's blood and was spilling out on the page, in the final attempt to accomplish the impossible. My father finished the drawing and let the brush and artifact tumble from his fingers. As it rolled into a dusty corner of the room, he raised his eyes, and there it was, a baby exactly like the one he'd drawn, with a simple stub. My father got steadily to his feet and picked up the infant in his arms, stood there for several minutes holding it, then brought it to my mother. But it would be many months before Mother accepted that this new infant, and even more before she became comfortable with the idea that this time this baby would stay. Maybe she never completely sure of it, but this time it worked. Who knows what made it so? But whatever my father had done, this time had created a being which did not disappear, and which eventually grew up into adult me. I saw all this progression of time through something that Renette did, some trick of hers, that projected into my mind a summary of growth into adulthood. I think she wanted me to be certain that this child, this successful experiment, was in fact me, and I was grateful for that. It was time to leave, time to return to the present, but I had to do something before we returned, and I crawled down to the wall of the floor and scuttled over to the artifact where it had fallen, gazed on it through my insect eyes, and mixture of fascination and resolution, fear, and away when I set to work. It took me days, but eventually, with Renette's help, I managed to find a way to unlatch a hinge on the artifact. And without unsettling, we wriggled the crystal out of its cage. It was exhausting work, but we managed to push the now free crystal across several feet of floor and tool it over the edge of a heating vent. He wavered at the edge for a moment, then tipped into the abyss of a vent. We listened to it bounce and slide down into the depths of a heating duct. The sound came fainter and fainter until they stopped entirely. The explosion we had made had brought our cockroach bodies to the brink of expiring, but there was one more thing I had to do. Renette and I went slowly back to the now empty artifact, with a great difficulty managed to unclose and latch its doors. Then we died. And in dying we returned to the present. I had a moment of wrenching realization when I was once more back in my human body. Maybe it had been because of the strangeness of being a cockroach while observing all that had happened in the past that kept it from hitting me so hard. But now it was all so painfully clear. I knew what I was. In those last moments in the past, I knew I had to do something to put the power of the artifact beyond my father's reach. If in my cockroach form it had been within my power to utterly destroy it, I would have done so. but I was limited to the action I took, and I had the desired effect. My father never again used the power of the artifact. I suppose that when he came back to look for it, perhaps when the idea of using it to create something else, he found the artifact with a crystal missing, and most likely assumed that it had simply vanished, perhaps using it up for burned out by the lost troll with it. It would be years later that Kirby would find the crystal and use it for his fashion. Why did I do it? It's simple. I knew that my mother was motivated by love and need and sincere desire to raise another child. Are those pure motives? I don't know. And anyway, is irrelevant. In all likelihood, my parents, though, thought that I would never learn the true nature of my origin, and that would have been a reasonable assumption for them. After all, how could they have known that in my later years I would become a friend to mutant turtles, encounter aliens, and learn the time stress? But all of that and more did happen, and I was able to learn the secret, and once I learned it, I couldn't let my father do it again. I couldn't let him create another child out of nothingness. Out of sheer will and desire that the mysterious power of some strange artifact. He didn't understand. Neither did my mother. As much as they loved me, that what they created was a shadow, a projected image. Because of my nature I now finally understand, I'm not fully human. Don't you see? That's why I can never have children with you, Casey. I'm a shade, a thought made three-dimensional, a good try by only a decent approximation of a real person. When you come right down to it, I'm just nobody. God, that was a really boring issue. I mean, it's interesting to find out how April was created and all, but at the same time, God, that was so wordy. Yeah, it's an interesting story, but they could have easily cut it down. But at least it's finally over. But yeah, that's gonna be it for today, guys. If you do like something, please share, like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Goodbye, yo. Bye.